Hello everyone, and welcome to my very first live Fireside chat. I'm just working on getting my YouTube up and running right now, so bear with me for a quick second, and please help share the video and invite people and start giving me your comments and asking questions. Okay, cool. It's working on Facebook. Hello, thank you for joining. Please share the video so we can get more people up on the live chat. Hi, Jacqueline. Just having some issues going live on YouTube at the moment. All right, got a couple people. Hi, Cindy. If you can also help share so we can get some more people in and get some comments going so I can start asking questions. We'll start the interaction in just a couple. Hi, Steve. If you can also help share, we'll be starting the interaction in just a second, just getting things set up on the YouTube at the moment. Hey Jonathan, how's it going? Good to see ya. If you can also help share the video, get some people up. If anyone has comments and questions to start, please start putting them in the comments and we'll start the interaction in just a second. Thanks. It is the same, yes. Okay, so I just have a little more gray hair since middle school. Okay, so YouTube is not happy with me at the moment. Let's see. Okay, so I am live on my YouTube now. Oops. I have kind of a jerry-rigged system. There we go. All right. Hello, YouTube. Hello, Facebook. Let's work this out. Okay. So this is going, that's going. All right. So pull this up so I can look at your questions. Okay, hi Bree, if you can also help share the video so we can get people asking questions and get things going, that would be awesome. Okay, YouTube's going, Facebook is going, I can see your comments, so that's awesome. So I'm just waiting for some people to join, get some questions going, and we'll get started with the Q&A. So if you have questions about water issues, just start putting them in the comments and I'll get started in just a second. Can I see? All right, can you guys hear me okay? So that's kind of a one question because I've got one going on my phone and one going on my iPad, so I just want to make sure that you guys can hear me okay. Can someone just let me know that you can hear what I'm saying okay? All right. Hey, Reverend, how's it going? Good to see you on here. Again, if you guys can help share the videos so people can start interacting and asking questions, that would be really helpful. Hi. Okay. So I guess I'll just kind of start, and as people join, that would be awesome. I will pay attention to the comments and do my very best to answer all of your questions. So today's topic is about water issues in the state of Michigan. And I want it to be a little broad, but also focused. So that way we can have some discussion on these issues, but also make sure that we're really actually having a back and forth and really getting into some of the nuance that's really important on some of these water issues. So that's why I'm doing it this way. Hi, Stephen. How's it going? Thank you so much. If you can also help share, and if you have questions, just go ahead and start putting them in the comments, and I will do my best to just answer all of your questions on water issues in Michigan. So we'll start first on water and sewer infrastructure. And we really need to get into some really major questions when we talk about water and sewer infrastructure. And one of the major problems with water and sewer infrastructure is, of course, that our infrastructure for all of these systems are extremely old. We have not, as a country and as a state, done enough to make sure that we upkeep our water and our sewer infrastructure. So we have not only crumbling pipes across our state and across our country, and crumbling roads and crumbling bridges, we also have water treatment plants that are not updated properly. And we're having issues like the recent hepatitis A outbreak that just happened across the Metro Detroit area. And so these are some really important issues that are going to be expensive to fix. And so, of course, when we talk about water and sewer infrastructure, we know that it's not a cheap fix, and it's something that we are going to have to look at sources of revenue to fix these issues. But it shouldn't be an option. Water and sewer infrastructure is around specifically for human health. If you look at just the history of why we have this kind of infrastructure and why we even moved to water and sewer infrastructure with piping below our streets rather than the old school way of people using chamber pots and throwing things out their window and having these like sludge sewage running down streets, is of course health issues. And so anytime we bring this up, we also need to talk not just about the health issues of the sewage, but also the health issues of our water. And so the health issues of our water is really dependent not just on the treatment of our water, but also making sure, aside from properly treating our water, which we know what happened in Flint, but that our water treatment plants are actually capable of treating water at the proper levels. And right now, most of our water treatment plants are probably not updated in order to meet the top standards for human health. And so this is where we're getting into some of these major issues, like what happened in Flint. Flint's water treatment plant could not properly treat water at all. Starting in 2009, when they were looking at all of the engineering reports of what was happening in Flint, they knew in 2009 that it needed $7 million worth of upgrades just to meet basic human health standards for treatment. And because it was operating at that time as a backup system, it wasn't necessary. although it really was necessary, but that's a whole kind of longer discussion on the necessaries. But when we talk about any kind of treatment, we need to make sure that these water treatment plants can actually properly treat water, even if it's just a backup water treatment plant, because otherwise what are we going to be doing? Right? That's a huge question. What are we going to do if we can't properly treat water? And so some of the things that need to be done. So about 15-ish years ago, I worked for Clean Water Action, and we worked on a campaign to stop sewage overflows. And to give you a little bit of history as to what sewage overflows are and how and why they happen. Sewage overflows happen mainly because water treatment plants don't have the capacity to properly treat water when there's a storm. So we have water treatment plants that are capable of the normal average use, which is just a normal day use. There's no extra water coming in that's coming from storms or anything of the sort. And instead, it's just our normal everyday usage of water for showers and for drinking and our toilets and things like that. And so what happens when it rains is our systems get overflowing because there's not enough capacity to hold all of that extra water. And so what water treatment plants do is they actually either shock the system. And so this is when you start talking about the issue of chlorine in our water and sewer systems. And then also you have the other additional issue of sometimes when there's too much water coming through, they can't even shock it with chlorine. And that's when we start having issues like beach closings, when we have E. coli in the water, which is really mainly from human feces. Although sometimes, yes, of course, E. coli outbreaks are from too many Canadian geese or things like that. But generally, oftentimes, the reason why we have these issues of water and sewage overflows is not because of Canadian geese. It's because we had a storm the night before or 2 days before, and all of the water ran back off into something like Lake St. Clair. And then that's why you see these beach closings. So our water and sewer systems need to be updated. They need to be upgraded, and they need to be able to handle storm capacity. And so not just your average everyday usage where the rest of us are using our normal water, but also for those times when we really need that additional capacity. Because the human health issue is also the everyday use, right? But the human health issue is also more than just the everyday use, and it's the issue of when we have storms and we have too much water in the system, we can't properly treat it, and it goes back into our environment, and then it's not even just using the beaches, that also causes other human health outbreak problems, because we don't always get the notices for a beach closing that instant. And so in the summertime, when we have a heavy rain and you have a beach closing, oftentimes that beach was contaminated the day prior, but they were notifying the public fast enough because of other reporting issues and things like that. Maybe the contracted help doesn't know the system very well. That's a very good point, Stephen. That is absolutely. We need to also make sure that we have people who are the employees of these plants, that they understand and are properly trained as to how to actually handle these water not just outbreaks, but these water instances and things like that, how to properly treat water, the things that they need to do. And also we need protection, additional protection for our whistleblowers. So when we talk about our water treatment plants, when we talk about the issue that happened in Flint, there were employees who were bringing up issues of switching to the Flint River too fast and not being able to properly treat water, and they were rushed through. And we need to make sure, especially for our health systems, that we actually give some additional protections and additional measures to protect our whistleblowers. So the people that are actually in the plant and the people who are the people in charge of our water treatment, that they can actually whistleblow if there's a problem. So I'll move on real quick, since I don't see questions about this issue, to water withdrawals. Shouldn't storm drainage be separate from regular household. Oh, I just lost my YouTube feed. All right. So for those of you watching on YouTube, my apologies. I'm just gonna keep this going on Facebook. So shouldn't storm drainage be separate from regular household and industrial sewage? That's a good question, Dan. Thank you for that. So yes, that's actually a really good way of fixing that problem. Is either separating some of the pipes so that we know that we have at least a separate pipe, so those pipes don't necessarily either break or start backing up, because that's a really good point when you talk about backups. If we have an additional storm drainage system, that would very much help stop the poop from coming into your basement. So that's a really good suggestion about what we need to do. So there are a lot of options that are out there about what we can do. And that's definitely something that I would certainly look into and start looking at some of the costs associated with creating just a new pipes, and specifically more so for some of our major roads, especially when we do a road repair. Since we're already tearing up that road, it would probably be really easy to add a secondary pipe that would be able to catch stormwater runoff and help with some of that flow. So it's not just that though, we also need to make sure that the water treatment plants also have the capacity to take that much water on as well, because that's part of the other problem with that issue as well. But that's a really good point about looking at doing an additional secondary piping just specifically for water runoff. And I've had sewage backup in my basement before, and so nobody wants sewage backup in their basement. It is a terrible thing to clean up. And it's something that we've had to deal with way too long. When I worked on that issue with Clean Water Action, it was over 15 years ago, and the problem still has not had a solution. So moving on next to water withdrawals, and of course, any questions that you have about any water issues, just pop them up and I will address them. So I want to talk about Nestle and what Nestle is doing up north. And how they are currently taking our water and making billions of dollars of profits and only paying our state $200 for a permit for the right to do so. There's a lot of issues associated with what's going on in Nestle and the water withdrawal. And so the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality is currently using Nestle and qualifying them the same way that we qualify an agricultural farm that uses the same amount of water. And here's where the difference lies. When you are using those same amounts of water that Nestle is currently taking from up north and you apply it to a farm, that water goes back into our groundwater system. So a farm may be using the same amount of water and water capacity that Nestle is currently using, but as soon as they use it, they're actually then going and putting it right back into the groundwater supply because they're using it to irrigate their crops, and it goes automatically right back into our groundwater. What Nestle is doing is they are actually actively removing water from our aquifers, from our groundwater supply, and they're not putting it back. They're bottling it, and they're selling it, and they're shipping it outside of state and around our state. So what has been happening in the areas where Nestle is doing this water withdrawal is they have seen that we do not have the same kind of rains coming down that is actually refilling the supply that Nestle is taking. So the rivers up north are actually starting to lower their water capacity. Since Nestle has started doing this water withdrawal, people who live in the area have had to drill their wells down further because a lot of the people that live around the area that Nestle is don't actually have water and sewer systems. They have wells. And so this is an economic issue for citizens because of the additional cost that is now being given to our citizens who live in those areas. And Nestle is not creating enough jobs to qualify the amount of tax breaks that they're getting and the fact that they're only paying $200 for that permit. The amount of profit that Nestle is making, if that water is considered a public good, which is what I consider water to be. Water is a public good, water is a human right, because if you're watching this and if you are a water activist, you know that the human body cannot live without water. And specifically, the human body can't go for longer than 3 to 5 days without access to water. And so if we are allowing Nestle to take our public good and making profit off of it, and then they are moving and going forward and making this profit without giving anything back to the state, it certainly seems like a bad business deal on the government's end. It's a really good business deal for Nestle, because Nestle gets to take our water for pretty much nothing and make billions of dollars in profit. And yet we, hi Joanne, but we as citizens, we cannot actually get any of those profits, even though it's our public good. And so this is really a twofold problem. It's an environmental problem, obviously, because of the issues with the water withdrawal and what they're actually taking from us, but it's also an issue of economics. And it's an issue of economics for Michigan citizens, that our government is not doing enough to protect our rights. If our government really thought it was a good idea to sell this water and to make money from this water, then what we should be doing is demanding a percentage and a return of the profits. We should be doing some form of profit sharing, and we should be required that Nestle be giving the state of Michigan a percentage of how much they're making on our water, instead of just issuing a permit for $200. Any questions? I see a few other people have joined. Hi and welcome, and please help share and get some more people in so we can have some more questions and have some more interaction. I'm really hoping for some tough questions that people try to stump me, because that would be outstanding. So I'll move on next to water shutoffs. So there's a few problems when it comes to water shutoffs, and this really does kind of circle back to the point of water and sewer infrastructure. And so the reason why we have water and sewer infrastructure is because of public health. What happened back in the early 1900s, when we started looking at actually creating these citywide water and sewer infrastructures, is people started getting sick, and you would have random outbreaks of things like what recently happened of hepatitis A. And so there have been studies, not just the one recently from Detroit, that showed that blocks in Detroit where water had been shut off have an increase of 1.5 times of waterborne diseases. But also, this has always been the case. So anytime we talk about water shutoffs, we automatically must also talk about the public health effects with shutting off someone's access to water. So when you have someone, especially in Detroit, what happened a lot of times with some of these instances where people were getting their water shut off, but they were renters. And so they had been paying their rent, and they had been paying their water bill, or at least they thought so, per their rent, and it was the landlord who was not actually paying the water bill. So instead of the city going to the landlord and finding the landlord and going after the landlord, who was the person who's the owner who was in charge of paying that water bill, they're going after the renter who had already been paying and shutting off their water. If you're unaware, in Michigan, if someone's water is shut off to their home and they have children in the house, the health department can call Health and Child Services and can have the child removed from their parent because they have no water access at their home. So it is also a human rights issue when we talk about this issue of access to water, aside from also being a public health issue. So it is not just in Detroit that people have had issues of their water shut off. It is also in Flint right now. People have been threatened with water shutoffs. And a lot of people in Flint have not been paying their water bill for many reasons. Major reason, of course, being the fact that Flint still does not have access to clean, safe drinking water right now. And so when people in Flint, specifically, to kind of bring that back for a second, people in Flint who do not have access to clean, safe drinking water, who still have not had their infrastructure replaced, which is now almost 2014, it's 2018, it's almost been 4 years that Flint has not had access to clean, safe drinking water. And they're now being told by the same government that poisoned them, that put them on this raw water when they knew that their water treatment plant couldn't properly treat water, that they're being told that their water is going to be shut off and being threatened with their children being taken away from them. And so that's a huge problem. And it's something that we need to talk about as a state. Although a lot of people think that the Flint water crisis has been solved, or a lot of people think that it's going to maybe partially be solved, or it's being taken care of. It's not being taken care of. It's not being taken care of properly. And we as a state know that Flint has not been taken care of. And so if we don't stand up for Flint, we know that we have this crumbling infrastructure across our state. And what happened in Flint very well could happen to another community. And so if we don't stand up for Flint, and if we don't do something to help Flint, then what's going to happen is it's going to happen somewhere else, and then that community is also not going to be properly taken care of either. So that's why I think Flint is the #1 issue in this gubernatorial race, because it has so many other implications to so many other communities. So let's talk real quick about line 5. And again, thank you. Hello, Nick. Hi, James. Please help share the video and get more people on and ask me your tough questions about water issues so we can have an interactive discussion. So moving on to line 5. So for those of you who don't know what line 5 is Enbridge's pipeline that goes right in the Mackinac Straits. So pretty much if you know where the Mackinac Bridge is, that's where line 5 is. It is a pipeline. It is under the water. And so, let me see, here, about here, it goes right about here. And so there's a lot of really amazing information online and some videos for you to look at that actually shows if line 5 broke, what would happen. And so if line 5 broke and there was an issue with this pipeline here, the oil in this pipeline would actually go all around all of the Great Lakes up north. It would completely surround Mackinac Island with oil, and it is crude oil that is currently being used through this pipeline. And if those of you are familiar with Kalamazoo River spill, that was crude oil as well, and crude oil doesn't float to the surface. Crude oil actually sinks to the bottom and gets into the sediment. And so the Kalamazoo River still has crude oil at the bottom of the river, and crude oil causes a lot of cancer-causing health effects. Stephen, so much emphasis on jobs and political campaigns. Couldn't the water infrastructure be potential for many jobs? Absolutely. That is a great point. So a lot of people say that these oil pipelines and things like that, that they bring jobs. And then that's why we need to support, and that's why they use things like eminent domain for the Nexus pipeline and other things that are going on with that. But those are temporary jobs. So building a pipeline is a temporary job. You build the pipeline and then you're done. When we talk about water infrastructure and road infrastructure, those are long-term jobs, especially when we think about how large our state is. We have a very large state when we talk about not just Michigan, the hand, but also the UP, right? That is a ton of infrastructure that would need to be replaced. And yes, absolutely, those are good jobs. Oftentimes those are union jobs, so they pay very well. So a lot of the people that can build the pipelines of the oil and gas pipelines, because that's part of the question when we talk to, or when unions are approached, and unions who do this kind of pipeline infrastructure, and they're approached, they say, no, we need these union jobs. We can take those same union jobs and create more good union jobs, and we can use those union jobs not to create more oil and gas pipelines, but to create more water and sewer infrastructure, and the proper water and sewer infrastructure that we actually need. And so yes, that's a really good point, Stephen. Thank you for that. So line 5, just to circle back on that real quick, line 5 is about 60 years old, and it has had some really major problems, especially recently. Some of the things that have been brought to the attention are that it has been leaking. It has been not just leaking, but it has also, there have been some cracks. So you have a pipeline, and because it's underwater, there are things that kind of hold it up over water and go right into the bed, and those are crumbling. And so the pipeline itself is not actually stable either. And so aside from cracking and being old and needing to be replaced anyways, because it is such an old pipe, it also is starting to crumble the supports. And so if the pipeline itself is fine, but the supports crumble and crack and break, then that's a whole nother wider issue, and that will also create the same kind of an oil spill. Stephen, he said, transient man camps bring a lot of problems, including trafficking of kidnapped women. That is such a good point. Yes. And human trafficking, that's a whole nother issue that is definitely something that you'll see in the next week or so. I'll have a new position point and issues up on my website on women's rights, and I will talk about sex trafficking in that. But that's a really good point. Michigan is actually number 2 in the country for sex trafficking. And oftentimes these camps of men who come in and build these pipelines, specifically when we talk about Native issues, and not just treaty rights, but also Native issues of when these pipes are going through Native territory, you have a lot of instances where Native women are kidnapped and are sex trafficked. And so it's not just the issue of things that happen when we talk about sex trafficking for things like the Detroit Auto Show, but sex trafficking also has some ties to the oil and gas pipeline industry. Okay, Mary says, you spoke about the water crisis in Flint. What and how are you going to also help the college students and people who work in Flint who have been part of this? And what will you provide for them? Tuition, room and board keeps going up. So I will do another Facebook Live on education issues where I'll get into some of the nitty gritty of those issues of increasing tuition and things like that. But when we talk about people who have been affected by the Flint water crisis, here's kind of my major plan for how to help those people is to create a universal healthcare system in Michigan. And so my plan on that will be out end of spring, early summer is when I'm planning on rolling all that out. I have a lot of research to do as to how to actually make that a reality in Michigan in terms of not just the financing of it and how much it's going to cost, but also how to actually build it all in together. But rolling out a universal healthcare plan, starting with Flint, and then rolling it out through the rest of the state. So people who have been affected by the Flint water crisis, either just by visiting Flint or going to college in Flint and being a commuter in Flint, or people who work in Flint but live outside of Flint and who are drinking water, universal healthcare is really, and that is the major cost to making Flint whole. The whole entire cost to fix Flint is between $1.2 and $4 billion, and a majority of those costs are actually healthcare. I did already do a fireside chat on Flint that's really comprehensive, specifically on that issue, and you can see that on my YouTube channel, and I've been sharing it also on this page, so you can find it in some of the most recent posts as well. There have been a couple of people that said some questions. All right, Dan asking, Snyder has proposed a tunnel for Line 5. Okay, yes. So the tunnel issue to me is a non-issue because Line 5 needs to be completely shut down and decommissioned. We don't need Line 5. Line 5 does not actually benefit Michigan at all. It just happens to go through Michigan. Enbridge is not even a company in the United States. It actually benefits Canada, and it goes through up to Canada. There's a lot of problems with Line 5. Line 5 just needs to be decommissioned. And we need to get off of oil and gas anyways. So that's also, I'll do another fireside chat on jobs in the economy, and I'll really get into what I'm talking about when I say a Green New Deal for Michigan, which is basically transitioning our state to 100% renewable energy over the 4 years of a first term for me. And that is a hard commitment that I will make to the people of Michigan, because I believe that we can transition our entire state over to 100% renewable energy within 4 years, and it's not something that people can say is pie in the sky or things like that. It is actually possible. Steven says, fines aren't enough on sacrificing our environment. Are you interested in decommissioning pipelines due to increases in technology? Building better should be a requirement just as it should in road repairs. Yes, absolutely. So all of these pipelines need to be gone. We don't need the Rover pipeline. We don't need Line 5. We don't need the Wolverine pipeline that's coming through the Wayne County area that's going to connect to the Nexus pipeline, which is another pipeline. And I'll kind of transition that into fracking a little bit too, because fracking has a lot to do with these pipelines as well, because there are some people who like to say that fracking and natural gas is renewable energy, and fracking and natural gas is not renewable energy. So when we talk about fracking, and I've done some extensive research on fracking. For those of you that don't know, I have a small radio show on a local internet radio station called Cave Radio Broadcasting. My show is called The Offensive Feminist with Jenny Kay, and I did do a whole show on fracking. So I have a lot of research that I've done on this issue of fracking. So fracking, for those of you that don't know, is hydraulic fracturing. And what that is let's say this is the ground. Underneath the ground are layers of sediment. And so there's rocks under here that are called shale. And inside these shale rocks is methane. And so hydraulic fracturing and fracking is drilling into where these rocks are, where the shale rock is, and sending in high pressurized water mixed with a lot of other chemicals that are explosive chemicals that they can then light on fire and explode the rocks and bring up the methane. They don't capture all of the methane, so fracking also does contribute to methane in our atmosphere, and so it does also contribute to climate change, which is again also why it's it's not actually a renewable source of energy. And then what happens is fracking is not under the Clean Water Act. And so the companies that do fracking do not actually have to disclose the chemicals that they're putting into our water supply. And so a lot of those chemicals, although they do extract the water, they don't extract all of it, and they don't extract all of the chemicals. And so where they frack, those chemicals end up staying and start polluting the groundwater supply. They then take that dirty water that they extract after extracting the methane, and they go to another place, and then they re-inject that dirty water back into the groundwater supply. And this is what has caused Oklahoma to now be the #1 spot for earthquakes. And they now have more earthquakes than California does. And Oklahoma's earthquakes are man-made. So if we open up Michigan to more fracking, which they want to do, because if you look at any of these websites that talk about fracking and hydraulic fracturing, the entire lower peninsula of Michigan is considered to be a prime spot for fracking. Yes, I see a lot of O faces. That is absolutely correct. So especially, there's a lot of people that believe the KWA pipeline, which is going across here from over here Lake Huron through to Flint. A lot of people believe that this raw water, because that's what they need to do fracking, that is going to open up more fracking industries along that corridor, which is the I-69 corridor. And that's a very dangerous thing for our state to be doing. Mel asked, the water lines and mains all need to be replaced. Over 70 acknowledged communities across Michigan live with unsafe water. Please speak to the residents on their day-to-day water part. Oop, someone else just popped up. Water pods need to continue and distribution increased. When I say speak to residents, I'm not referring, well, I'll go into, I don't want to talk about people. So yes, water lines and mains, and I spoke about it at the beginning, but I'm fine with repeating myself as we get more people interacting, because this is about me speaking to you all So yes, all of our water treatment systems need to be replaced. We need to increase the capacity of our water treatment plants, and we also need to look at things. One of the people on here suggested having a separate water main specifically for water and sewer infrastructure to stop sewage backups, and I think that's a really great idea. And yes, we need to make sure that all of our water treatment plants not just have the capacity to hold water, but also are up to date with the top level kinds of treatment to make sure that everyone in Michigan has access to the best quality water to the highest possible standards, not just the EPA standards, but the highest possible standards that technology can allow. Anything less should be unacceptable to everybody. Mary said, do you think the college and universities knew about the Flint water crisis and hid the fact to the public with their professors? Or do you think they were told to keep quiet? GM didn't by switching the water system when it was running their engines. So yes, Mary, that's a really good point. And so for those of you who just joined, I do have another Fireside chat that I did as a pre-recorded on Flint specifically, where I address all of those issues. I spent about 6 months researching the Flint water crisis in the end of 2015, beginning of 2016, and I created an hour-long documentary on everything that I found. And all of that information is available on my website. And all of that is also available, and I speak to it on my Fireside chat. So yes, I don't know necessarily if the colleges and university knew exactly what was going on, but certainly the people who were the decision makers knew as of 2009 that Flint's water treatment plant could not properly treat water. So yes, they knew. They knew before. There was a study done in 2011 by then Mayor Dane Walling that actually studied the Flint River and using it as a primary source of drinking water. And at that point, it was a $50 million upgrade that would have needed to be done to Flint's water treatment plant in order to properly treat water. And just switching to the KWA was an $8 million upgrade. And the state knew from a study that they did in 2013, and actually upgrading Flint's water treatment plant was part of the bond deal in 2014 for the KWA. And so yes, they all knew, especially when GM switched. The governor knew, the governor had been briefed. The state treasurer knew. They all also knew that staying on Detroit water and sewer system was not just cheaper, but it was also financially better for the city, because a lot of the excuses are that it was saving money, but it actually was not saving money either. Virginia says, more like a 40-year in the making crisis. Yes. Mel said, the professors had to keep knowledge to themselves for fear of losing grants and funding. That's a really good point. If there were people who suspected what was going on, it is very possible that they did not say anything because they were afraid for their jobs. And that's a whole, another kind of a problem. And again, that's more of something that we need to look at when we talk about whistleblower protection and making sure that we have stronger whistleblower protection specifically for public health, for people who speak out, that they have additional protections, not just of job protection and things like that. How much money do you think it is going to take to overhaul and fix Michigan's infrastructure, including Line 5? That's a really good point. When we talk about costs, none of this is cheap. Infrastructure is not cheap. But one of the great things about infrastructure is if we keep the jobs to Michiganders, that money goes back into our economy. And so even if we would be spending a very large amount of money, a lot of that money would then be going back into our local economy. So to overhaul and fix our entire infrastructure, Line 5 to me is kind of NA. It just needs to be decommissioned and completely shut down. We do not need Line 5 to be operating at all. And so that's just kind of an easy, we don't need to replace Line 5. There's no need to. What we need to do is we need to create more new green jobs for Michiganders and take these old manufacturing plants and turn them into plants for renewable energy to create more jobs and put people in our skilled trades to work and doing things like making wind farms and making solar panels and things like that. So the total cost to overhaul our infrastructure is kind of a ridiculous number. It is definitely in the billions, and not just a couple billions. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars. So it's not something that is going to be an easy fix. It is not something that is going to be something that we can fix in 6 months. It is a long-term fix. So the first step to our infrastructure is we really don't know exactly what infrastructure needs to be replaced and what infrastructure does not need to be replaced. So the first step is to look at all of our infrastructure, to test all of our water systems, and to first go to the places where the infrastructure is crumbling the most and then work out from there. So this is going to be a very long-term kind of a plan that we need to do to fix. It is something that I believe that we can do within 4 to 10 years or 5 to 10 years. But that's really kind of, it depends on when we do some real studies and we really look at our water treatment plants, exactly what water treatment plants need what. Because all water treatment plants are not the same. Some communities have upgraded their water treatment plants and don't need additional major overhauls. Other communities, specifically in low-income urban areas and low-income rural areas, they need additional help. And rural areas have different needs because a lot of those people are on septic systems and wells. And so we need to look at things like arsenic. So there's naturally occurring arsenic in our groundwater supply. And a lot of people who are on wells have certain kinds of filters that help protect their water supply. So we need to make sure that people who are on wells also have the same kind of standards when it comes to their water supply, as well as the same kind of help as just as in cities like Detroit and Flint. Okay, so the plumbers unions have offered several times to donate their skills to help upgrade our water infrastructure. That's a really good point, Mel. Absolutely. Now, I do believe that they should be paid living wages in order to do the work. But in some cases, like Flint, when it comes to emergency fast repair, that's certainly something I don't understand why the state has not taken that up on that offer. I think it's more so that they are not interested in fully fixing Flint. The entire legislature has all of the information that I've talked about on my Flint Fireside chat, and I'll show you all exactly what they received. So this right here is a 5-pound packet of information. I have a 28-page annotated timeline that goes from 2009 all the way through 2015. On what happened in Flint. They all have this, which is the engineering report from 2009 from the KWA, which shows all of the information that Flint's water treatment plant could not properly treat water back then, and what was being discussed then. 2011, this is the report from Dane Walling that he did on the Flint River. 2013, this is the report that the state commissioned. And in this report specifically that the state commissioned, they reference both the 2011 and the 2009 reports. And then 2014, these are the bond documents. So you can see all of those on my website as well. Those are also available to you. Virginia says, I have close friends who are desperate need of stomach problems addressed immediately. Yes, the people of Flint are suffering from really serious health issues because we talk a lot in the media, or the media talks a lot about the issue of lead, which is kind of the main caveat that was the turning point and even the Flint water crisis being recognized as a crisis. But they were being given raw water from the Flint River. And many people in Flint are aware that not just GM, but many other industries were polluting the Flint River for decades. And so it's not just lead that was being given to people in their water. There were PCBs and many other toxins, and they're creating really serious health issues in Flint. And that is why when I talk about universal healthcare for the state of Michigan, rolling it out first to Flint residents and then to the rest of the state, because Flint needs it first, and they need it desperately, and they need it because the state knew and is culpable. And it's not just Republicans, it's not just Rick Snyder, it's also Democrats who also helped cause the Flint water crisis and who are also doing nothing to help the people of Flint. Mel says, our water infrastructure is 100+ years old. It all needs upgrading. Yes, absolutely. Again, please continue to give me your questions and ask me the tough questions, and give me, if you have suggestions, if there's research that you have done that I haven't touched on, please let me know, because I definitely want to take your information as well and use that, because it's not just about me. I'm running for governor, right? But I want to represent you. And so if you have more expertise on an issue that I don't have, I'm absolutely always willing and open to talk with anyone and have further dialogue on some of the solutions to fix these problems in our state. Okay, got a couple more. Mel, thank you. I like you. So far, I'm not noticing you're trying to candy coat anything. I appreciate you're awake. Don't allow yourself to be silenced, regardless if you make governor or not. Thank you. Thank you so much. Nope, I'm not really a sugarcoater. I believe in facts, and everything that I speak to, I do a lot of research. I have my degree in political science, so political science and as a researcher in politics is something that my brain just works that way. And the things that are happening in our state and in our country are very serious issues that don't have a black and white answer. Everything that we talk about, even if it's just water infrastructure, is nuanced because everything is different, especially in a state like Michigan. The problems in the UP with water are different than the problems that people in Detroit are having with water. So we can't just talk about water issues as a one-stop shop. And we talk even about any kind of legislation as a one-stop shop in our state. We need to make sure that anytime we're making legislation when it comes to water issues or anything else, that we acknowledge the fact that our state is very diverse and that we need to have different solutions for rural areas than we do need to have different solutions for urban areas. And that goes same with townships. I live in a township, so I know that township issues are different from city issues, and suburban issues are also different from city and rural issues as well. Mary says, Snyder was employed with Coopers and Lybrand from 1982 to 1991, beginning in the tax department of the Detroit office. He was named partner in 1988. Next year, so that just goes into his business career, and then it kind of dots. I can't see very long comments when I'm live. So yes, there are a lot of problems with Rick Snyder's background and where he comes from, his financial background. And I do also have a background in finance. I worked in banking for over a decade, and so one of the major things that I did when I was in the banking industry is I worked with a lot of small businesses. And so I started in banking in 2004. So I started right before the recession hit. And I worked with businesses throughout the recession, and I saw directly how it impacted small business owners. And that's a really major issue because our state did not do enough to actually help small business owners to survive throughout the Great Recession, and we lost a lot of really amazing small businesses, and people went bankrupt, and people lost their businesses during the recession. Virginia says, need chelation immediately and doctors that listen and do instead of saying what they're told for profit. I completely agree with you. When I talk about universal healthcare, and when I get into that, once I have a really full and complete plan for rolling out a universal healthcare system in Michigan, we need to remove the profit from our healthcare. There should not be any kind of a profit in healthcare, and the fact that we still allow profiteering over people's lives is really atrocious. The fact that the #1 use for GoFundMe accounts is to help people with medical bills is unconscionable. And as a first world country and as the richest country in the world, in the history of the world, the fact that we have people that still can't keep a house if they get cancer, or people go bankrupt because they have a medical issue, is atrocious, and that shouldn't be acceptable to anyone. And I don't know a lot about chelation, but I do know chelation is something that is used to help some of the effects of lead. And absolutely, if that is even just something that people want to attempt to help those who have lead poisoning. And again, it is not just in Flint. There are many other issues that are starting to see elevated levels of lead in their children's bloodstreams. And I believe that has a direct correlation to our crumbling water and sewer infrastructure. Flint already had high levels of lead compared to the rest of the state. And Flint's water infrastructure was actually only operating at a 65 to 70% efficiency. And so before the crisis happened, so what that means is most normal water and sewer infrastructure operates at about 85 to 90% efficiency. And so that is actually accounts for things like there's a water main break here, like obviously we just had a deep freeze, and so there's been quite a few water main breakings. So those kinds of things, some leaks, things like that. But Flint's specific water and sewer infrastructure was way past it. It was already at 75 to 100 years old in 2014 when they switched to even more corrosive water. And so I can't imagine what the percentage is for Flint's water treatment plant to be operating at currently. AG pollution. How do you propose to enforce DEQ recommendations to prohibit the spreading of manure on frozen land if we have no budget for police such actions? So that's a really good point. So talking about the issue of permits. So currently, and again, this is something that I worked on when I worked for Clean Water Action about 15 years ago. We worked on actually charging a fee for these permits. And the fact that 15 years ago we were not actually charging a fee, that companies could just apply for a permit from the DEQ to pollute and they didn't have to pay anything to do so, and that we had to really do some heavy lobbying to just charge a nominal fee for companies to pollute. I think that now that we have this at least ground base that companies do have to pay something, that we incorporate actual real costs of the business for pollution. So if a company wants to pollute, and there are ways, so right now when you talk about manure, that's really getting into CAFOs, which is a controlled animal feeding operation. And those are the big factory farms. That's another word for it. So that's where we have cows and chickens in very small areas on cages stacked on top of each other, going to the bathroom on top of each other, being pumped full of chemicals and pesticides, and not seeing the sun ever, and living their entire life in cages where birds get their noses chopped off and things like that. Those factory farms create a ton of manure from those animals. That manure is not it's not under the Clean Water Act. And so all of that manure oftentimes gets pulled into just kind of like a cesspool of disgusting poop on like the side of the farm. And when it rains, it just runs off. So there's no protections, there's no actual limits or rules on that manure and how it can actually be used. And so we need to do, as a state, put stronger guidelines on CAFOs and start limiting those controlled animal feeding operations from actually operating in Michigan, because they're damaging not just to our environment, but they're also damaging to local farmers. When we have small farmers that are trying to have an organic farm or just want to have a good small farm where they can, bring out their meat and go to farmers markets and give us fresh produce, oftentimes their prices are higher because they can't compete with these big farms. And these big farms are the ones who get the subsidies, not the little farms. And so when we talk about subsidies, we need to make sure that the subsidies go to small farms and not to the large operations, because the large operations have the money and they don't need the kind of money from our government that our small farms do. And so we need to make sure that we're protecting our small farmers more so than these big factory farming operations. So when we talk about these policing of polluters, these polluters need to pay the fee for the permit that allow enough people to monitor what they're doing. Right now it's at about once every 3 years, I believe, is how much they pay to afford for someone to come out. And once every 3 years is unacceptable. It needs to be at least once a year. And they also, especially when we talk about, and this is kind of a different topic, so I'm not going to get into it too much, when we talk about air pollution and what is happening specifically in the 48217 zip code where the Marathon plant is in Detroit, that permit, some of that is federal and some of that is also state. And so on the state level, we just need to make sure that we can charge the true cost of those businesses. And the true cost of the business of Marathon plant and all those other factories in that area is also the additional $1 billion of healthcare costs that is from that pollution. And so that is also one of the ways that we can transition away from oil and gas, is not just by having additional people that are monitoring what they're doing, but making the costs for these fees so high and incorporating the real true costs to our environment and to public health that these companies are doing, that they can't and don't want to operate those businesses in our state anymore. And I have no problems with saying to these big businesses, so long goodbye, leave our state, we don't want you here. And bringing in new businesses that are not going to create the same kind of health problems and transition to a Green New Deal in Michigan. Mel says over 200 contaminants, many of which are not being disclosed to the residents. Absolutely, yes. Mary says he was adjunct professor and served on the U of M boards in the past. Yeah, that's true. Mark says, am I too late? No, you are not too late. Please welcome and ask your questions. Mel says, sadly, over 5,000 knowledge communities across the nation are living with unsafe water. Yes, they're absolutely. Yes, and domestic violence. Yes, so I will also be rolling out the next couple of weeks a platform on women's issues and gun rights, and talk about also domestic violence and the issues with how both the gun industry and gun violence connects with domestic violence, because that's a very good point. Hello, Noreen. All right, so now I'm at the bottom of comments. So again, any comments and questions that you have, please, I will be here live until nobody has any more questions. So what I haven't spoken about yet is invasive species. So let's talk a little bit about the issue of invasive species in Michigan. So we have what's considered, we have these ships coming through the Great Lakes, obviously, and they go through things like the Sioux Locks, and they come to our ports. And when they come to our ports, they get rid of what's called ballast water. And the ballast water is at the bottom of a ship. So you have a ship, and part of it is underwater. And so underwater, they actually keep water. And so they take in water from wherever they were, and then they go, and it helps balance out the boat. So as they come to Michigan, what they do is they get rid of their ballast water when they are at a port. And then when they go again, they bring up more water and then they go. And so this ballast water is what is bringing in a lot of these invasive species. So we have, these zebra mussels and so many other issues that are coming in. And our state just a couple of months ago has decided that they want to lessen some of the restrictions that we have on these invasive species and on this ballast water. And their kind of point is that it is taking away business from Michigan ports. And what is happening is these ships are going to ports in Toronto, or they're going all the way to Chicago, and they still end up getting rid of their ballast water in the Great Lakes. And so it's really both an issue of our state, and it's also a federal issue, and it's also an international issue. So this is really something that we need a stronger Great Lakes consortium of people working together in Canada, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, and across the entire Great Lakes to find a solution for this issue. The solution for this issue is not to have less regulations. The solution for this issue is to have stricter regulations that everybody agrees upon that is going to actually protect our Great Lakes, rather than creating these kinds of laws and policies that benefit business over the rest of us. And so I have for a long time kept a constitution in my pocket, and I just did a whole series on the Bill of Rights. And one of the interesting points when we look at the Bill of Rights is actually the 9th Amendment. And so the 9th Amendment is the amendment that basically says that we can't enumerate all of our rights, which means there's no way that any government can ever put all of the rights of the people into one small little legislative guide. And that those rights are just inherent to people, and are not something that we need to write all down because we might miss something or things like that. And things like access to clean water, I believe, falls under the 9th Amendment. And so we are protected on these issues. It just hasn't actually been fought in that manner in court yet. And so I think that that's one of the things that I would love to have the Green Party find an Attorney General candidate who believes in water rights and who believes in these issues and who will actually fight for us based on our right to have clean air to breathe and clean water to drink, because that's not something that needs to be legislated. That is something that we need in order to live. Beulah says, chat on water issues. Definitely any specific questions that you have that I haven't brought up yet on water issues, please, bring up. Marita says, will land banks ever do any demolition in Flint? So that's something that, kind of doesn't necessarily go on water issues, but I'll touch on real quick for you. So the land bank is kind of a separate entity from Flint. Now, when we talk about issues of blight, specifically in our urban cities, we do need to, in some instances, demolish those homes, and in some instances, we need to also turn those homes around, and some of them can be kept up. But it's really an issue of twofold. When we talk about this blight and these issues of these abandoned homes that are destroying our cities, it's a responsibility of one of two entities. So once a home goes into foreclosure, it's then owned by the bank or it's owned by the land bank, depending on if it's a tax foreclosure or if it's a bank foreclosure. And so we need to be holding the land banks. It's not just Flint, there's also land banks in Wayne County and other areas across our state. It's not just the land banks, it's also the banks. And many of the local city officials don't do anything or can't do anything to go to these banks because they're so large to hold them accountable for their upkeep of these homes. And that's something that we can work on getting legislation passed through the Michigan Senate and House that will give municipalities some additional teeth to go after the corporate owners of these homes so that they don't fall into such disrepair. And then also giving grants specifically for demolition of homes that just need to be demolished and are so either run down or have been the victim of an arson or a fire or things like that, that we can clean that up. What is your stance on both medical and recreational marijuana? So I have a full platform point on marijuana, and I will do a fireside chat in full and get into a lot of the nitty gritty on marijuana as well. But medicinal marijuana, as well as recreational marijuana, I am both in favor of. I'm very excited actually to have recreational marijuana legalized in Michigan in 2018, which is what it looks like what they're actually, they got enough signatures to put it on the ballot. So I'm very much looking forward to that, not just because, a lot of people smoke marijuana and are unfairly in the prison system because of that, but also because it's going to bring a lot of revenue to our state. And we can use a lot of this revenue from recreational marijuana to fix some of these problems, specifically infrastructure and public education. And I'm working right now also on another Fireside chat on public education to get into that. For those of you that don't know and are just finding out about me, I do currently serve on the Redford Union School Board. I'm the president of the board and have been for the past 3 years. I was elected to a 6-year term in 2012, which ends this year in 2018. And so I have had experience as an elected official and have really been doing a lot with my local school district. So I want to kind of go back, for those of you that are watching, I'll go back again to water and sewer infrastructure for a second. And again, thank you for those of you who are just joining. Any questions that you have on water issues, please put them in the comments. And any suggestions or things like that, I'm also taking those as well. Please put them in the comments. I'm watching the comments and we can be interactive. So water and sewer infrastructure across our state is crumbling, and we need to do more and we need to do better. There is a lot of money when we talk, kind of tying that into the question on marijuana. If we take this tax revenue from legal marijuana in 2019, we can actually have a huge kind of first step to do some real major overhauls in our infrastructure. And not just changing our pipes and fixing the pipe issues, but also fixing the issues in our water treatment plants to make sure that the water that is coming to our homes has the highest possible standards to the top technology that is currently available. We live in Michigan, which is, we're surrounded by 20% of the world's freshwater resources, and there's absolutely no excuse that anyone in Michigan should not have access to proper drinking water. Thank you, Bernie. Good to see you watching. Hope all is well with you. So when we talk about this issue of water treatment, so there's many ways that we can put the kinds of treatment in our water and sewer infrastructure, so in specifically our water treatment plants, not just to be able to properly treat water at the base kind of a level that the EPA standards tell us, but we need to look at what kind of technology is out there and what kind of technology is available on a mass scale that we can go to every single water treatment plant across our state and make sure that every water treatment plant in Michigan is operating at standards that are at the top technology available to us. And then when we talk about rural areas that are on wells and have other needs when it comes to water issues, that our rural communities also have the available technology for that when they're using their wells, and they're using it not just for their showers but for drinking water and things like that. And I'm not just talking about water softening kind of things, I'm talking about actual active filters for things that are naturally occurring in our groundwater like arsenic, that people in rural areas also have the same kind of access to the best possible technology that is out there to give them also the same kind of safe drinking water. I'm going to have a drink of water real quick. So for those of you who just joined, I keep getting people like coming in and out. Please feel free. I will be live for as long as you all have questions about these issues. And then of course you can go back and you can watch the whole video, and any further questions that you have you can send to through my website and things like that. So I'll give you kind of my first, so I'm high tech on Facebook Live, so this is my little shout out. So this is how you can help and contribute to my campaign, which is www.curlandformichigan.com. If you would like to donate, I need 4,167 people to donate $18, and that would get me to the $75,000 point where I would be able to start getting state matching funds for my campaign. Marita said, what did you test your water for and by whom? So I've actually never tested my water. Tested my water when I first moved into my house, but I do just go based off of, I read every year the water report that comes out. So I worked many years ago for Clean Water Action, and so I do believe the Right to Know report in our water is very important. I think it does need to be updated in Michigan, that we need to include more contaminants when we talk about the public's right to know and our right to know what's in our water. And so we do need to expand what kind of contaminants are told to us of what's in our water and the levels of those contaminants. So currently I just use, that for my personal water. I live in Redford, so I am on the GLWA system, which used to be the Detroit Water and Sewer System. And there have been some interesting things going on, but my water is actually provided by the city of Detroit because I live on the border. And some people, especially the recent issue of water main breaks, some people, the water is coming from and through other communities. And GLWA has been doing a lot of work along the Telegraph corridor right now with some pipe replacements. So there have been some pipe replacements that are going on across our state for some of the mains that are very bad or mains that have been breaking and have had some longer known problems. But it certainly is not at the level that it needs to be. And in some cases, some communities, especially like Flint, they don't know. They don't know what pipes are where. They don't have proper mapping. And so we need to bring Michigan also into the 21st century. And so when we talk about infrastructure repair, we don't just need to do a repair and then allow things to sit and crumble in another 50 years. We have the technology now that we can monitor, and we know, and we can find out for those communities that don't have the good records where all of these pipes are across our state, have full records in the Department of Environmental Quality and in local water departments, so that there's also local control, because I believe firmly in the Green Party value of decentralization and making sure that local communities have the most control over all aspects of their life, including water treatment plants. And so we can actually start a pattern of repair. Because even when we look at infrastructure of roads, one of the great things when you do some research on actual road infrastructure is if you monitor road infrastructure and you do repairs when roads just start to have issues, rather than waiting until our roads are the way they are now in some areas and are completely destroyed, where we need to do a full and complete rebuild. It is much more expensive to do a full and complete rebuild than it is to do repairs on a regular basis. And so we need to set up a system in our state that people can actually send questions and problems to these departments, both their local water and sewer system and their water treatment plants and their local water officials, but also to the state. So both the state and the local areas can have not just a monitoring process, but also a way that the public can tell them when there's an issue or where there's an issue. So if we go through a full billions and billions of dollars of infrastructure repair and we don't have the proper programs in place to know exactly where we did these replacements and when we did these replacements and what we did we do a full rebuild? Did we just do a minor repair? Was there just a leak, or was there a main break? What exactly did we do to these pipes, and what exactly did we do to this infrastructure? We need to have a full database of all of this information for the entire state. And then we need to make sure within this database that we're monitoring when we need to do regular repairs. Because it is not fair to us as taxpayers to have to foot this billions and billions of dollars of tax money now, because 40 years ago, our officials didn't do the proper reporting and didn't have anything properly in place for us to know when we needed to do some of these repairs, and have allowed our pipes to go to this point where they're crumbling across our state. And so we should never allow that to happen ever again. And so one of the key points when we talk about water and sewer infrastructure is we need to make sure that we're monitoring for the future, forever, our water and sewer infrastructure, so it never gets this bad ever again. I saw a couple comments pop up, so I just want to make sure. Joanne said, thank you for talking to the people. You've got my vote. Thank you, Joanne. I appreciate it. Go green in 2018. Hello, those of you who have joined. Any questions that you have on water issues, please send them through the comments, and I will do my very best to address them for you. So I want to go back to line 5 for a second and some of these issues of pipelines. So line 5, if line 5 broke, which is very possible because of how it's crumbling, we would have oil and crude oil through our entire Great Lakes. And this is an economic issue as well as an environmental issue. Because of where the pipeline actually is and the currents of the Great Lakes, line 5 is actually the worst possible spot for this oil to go across the Great Lakes. So it would cover Mackinac Island. And I think that's a really important point just to kind of start when we talk about the actual damage. The state gets a lot of money from tourism. Tourism is one of our top industries, and we have this tourism because of the Great Lakes. And Mackinac Island is a key point in our tourism. There are millions and millions and millions of people who go through Mackinac Island during our tourist season when it's open. And if Mackinac Island was surrounded with crude oil, how many tourists do you think would actually be coming to Michigan to come to Mackinac Island? Or how many people from downstate do you think would be going up to Mackinac Island for tourism? They wouldn't, because who would want to go to an island that's surrounded by crude oil, or who has no beauty anymore because the whole island would be surrounded by crude oil? So there's only so much that you can clean up of crude oil. And the Kalamazoo River is really the best way to describe exactly what will happen to the Great Lakes if we don't shut down and decommission line 5. Because the Kalamazoo River, when the Kalamazoo River broke, when the pipeline broke that was by the Kalamazoo River, which was also an Enbridge pipeline, Enbridge has a monitoring system that tells them if there's a problem. And so Enbridge, one of their talking points when they talk about pipeline safety, is that they can shut down one of these pipelines at any time with no problem. And that it's just a simple switch, and things are fine, and they get this notice. Except in the case of the Kalamazoo River, when they got the notice, they thought that there was just maybe a plug or a problem in the pipeline. And so instead of turning it off, they actually turned up the volume and started pushing more oil through. And so they were doing more of an oil spill until finally, hours later, after pushing and pushing and pushing more and more oil, more so than the normal oil, and it was already broken, and that's why the Kalamazoo River is the worst inland oil spill in our country's history. And I don't know if a lot of people know just how bad the Kalamazoo River spill was. And because of it was being crude oil, and the difference between crude oil and the other oil that you see, like if you take your olive oil and you put olive oil on a glass of water, the olive oil floats. And so a lot of people think if there's an oil spill, all you got to do is just, take it off the top of the water and skim it off and you're fine. And that's not the case with crude oil, and that's why the issue of Enbridge really mirrors the Kalamazoo River, just on a much larger scale, because we're talking about the fate of the Great Lakes and the entire Great Lakes system. So crude oil sinks to the bottom because it's so heavy, because of how it's refined, and it sinks to the bottom and it gets into the sediment. So here are some of the things that it does. It causes cancer. So a lot of the people that lived along the Kalamazoo River still are experiencing health issues from living on the Kalamazoo River when there was an oil spill, because they were not just because of the oil, but because of the noxious fumes that came from the oil. And they use a lot of chemicals to do a cleanup that are also dangerous to human health. And so the cleanup efforts for an oil spill is also dangerous to human health, aside from the fact that the oil itself is also dangerous to human health. And once that oil is in the sediments, it's very difficult to clean up. And it's really actually impossible to fully clean up. And so that crude oil now is sitting at the bottom of the Kalamazoo River, which means if you are a fisherman, and a lot of people in Michigan are people who enjoy fishing and enjoy eating Lake Michigan fish. And if you pay attention, we have lists of all the fish in Michigan, all of the different lakes and all the different fish in all the different lakes, with the health effects and how many fish of each different kind you can eat without having health issues. And oftentimes, and I would say more often than not, doctors tell pregnant women not to eat any fish from the Great Lakes at all. And so that's a huge issue because that's how much pollution that we have. And the crude oil ends up going into the small animals that fish eat and then bioaccumulates. And bioaccumulation is a scientific technical term, which means that what you eat, whatever that ate, you are also eating. So if you eat a fish that ate something that had crude oil in it, you now also have crude oil inside of you. And human beings cannot digest crude oil, obviously. And when we ingest crude oil, it causes health problems. And that's why there's limits on fishing. It's not just because of issues of oil, it's also because of issues of other contaminants that we've allowed companies to pollute into our water supply for far too long with no consequences. Hello to people who have joined. Any questions that you have on water issues, please ask them. I am here to answer your questions and have a back and forth discussion with everyone. So any questions that you have, please ask. I'll talk real quick, again, just about Flint for a minute, because I do, again, think the issues of Flint go through all other communities in Michigan. So what happened in Flint is that the local officials knew that Flint's water treatment plant could not properly treat water. And they knew before any of these switches. And the bond documents were also talked to Flint needing to upgrade its water treatment system. But the state, knowing all of this information and knowing it was a requirement of the bond deal, never gave any permission, never gave any permits, and never gave any funding to upgrade Flint's water treatment plant. So it is my belief that based on all of the information that I have researched on the Flint water crisis, that our state was never interested in public health in any of this decision making. And part of that is our elected officials, and part of that are our civil servants. And so there have been a lot of questions about the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality and whether or not they just rubber stamp everything. And so that's a really big question. Does the MDEQ just get a permit and stamp it and say approved, or are they actually actively looking at protecting public health? And this has been an ongoing problem. It's not just an issue under a Republican governor. It has also been an issue under Democratic governors as well. So this is an issue with both of the two major parties, that we've had this Department of Environmental Quality that just kind of rubber stamps things for corporations and doesn't actually actively do anything for public health. Marita asks, it's been 15 years, DC and Lansing already dealt with lead. Why hasn't Flint learned anything? I think that's kind of a multifold question, Marita. The entire Michigan legislature does have the information necessary to know who was culpable and why, but they don't really apparently care to do anything about it. I think it's both because Flint has a very high poverty rate, and I think it's also because the media has allowed Flint to fall off from the spotlight. And so it's definitely a major platform point, and I think it's the #1 issue in this gubernatorial race, and it's something that I will continue to speak to and continue to speak on, and make sure that people continue to talk about Flint. And it is certainly a pledge of mine to make Flint whole. And so making Flint whole is not just fixing the pipes, and making Flint whole is not just giving universal health care to Flint and the entire state. There's other issues that happened in Flint. All children in Flint should be considered to be lead exposed. And that means that we need to have additional funding specifically for Flint's education and to Flint schools for all of those children who have been exposed to lead, because lead causes additional behavior problems and learning disabilities in children. And so they need to have access to additional social workers for some of the behavioral issues. So that needs to be properly funded. They need to have proper nutrition. And when I talk about public education in a future Fireside chat, I'll get into my plan on having breakfast and lunch free for all children in all public schools in Michigan. And the other issue of public education for Flint is also giving the additional resources that these kids need for their teachers. So teachers also need the additional professional development on things like behavioral issues and things like teaching children that have additional special needs and have been exposed to these kinds of chemicals and the behavioral problems that come with this exposure to chemicals. The other thing that Flint needs to be made whole is replacement of their appliances that are water appliances. A lot of people in Flint have had to replace their hot water heaters and or their dishwashers and their washing machines because the dishwashers and the washing machines and hot water heaters are also susceptible to issues of lead and other contaminants and have broken down. And so those appliances also need to be replaced for homeowners that have lost those appliances due to the water issue. And I also believe that the people of Flint must have free water for a decade as reparations. That's something that has been suggested by some of the experts who have been investigating Flint, is to give the entire city water credits for a decade. And that's something that I believe in, and it's something that I believe is part of the reparations to Flint. Virginia says all residents too. Yes, absolutely. Especially elderly residents, because the effects of lead specifically, and not any of the other contaminants, because we don't even know all of the other contaminants, but lead specifically is epigenetic. So it's not just something for residents currently, it's also residents' children and the children of Flint's future children. Because the effects of lead, for those of you that don't know, is lead, because of the kind of metal that it is, it gets into your bones when it's ingested. And specifically for elderly residents and pregnant women, as you get older and your bones start to deteriorate a little bit, that lead then seeps out again and causes additional health effects to people who are elderly. And women who are pregnant, oftentimes their bones also change, and then the lead then seeps out into their bloodstream and gets into their unborn child, which means that lead poisoning and lead exposure is passed on to future children. And that's one of the reasons why also Flint has seen a very high increase of miscarriages. And that's something that also needs to be addressed, that women who are pregnant in Flint specifically, or women who even want to get pregnant in Flint, also need to have access to doctors that can help them through a pregnancy that we know is going to have additional problems, specifically because of what happened in the Flint water crisis. All right, I've been going for for a while now. It's getting close to 9 o'clock. So does anyone have any other questions? There's only a few people that are still watching right now. And so I just want to make sure that I answer all of your questions. And is there anything else before I sign off for this fireside chat that you would like to ask me? Okay, I don't see anything. Okay, so I'm going to sign off for right now. I will do other future live fireside chats, so please stay tuned to my Facebook page, and you'll see other future fireside chats. I just want to sign off on a couple of things real quick. First, if you like the things that I say, I need your help. And that means I need you to donate to my campaign. This is my high-tech www.curlandformichigan.com/donate. I need 4,167 people to donate $18. And then I will be the first Green Party candidate in Michigan to achieve state matching funds so I can continue working on this campaign for you. If you want to look at some of the other issues, just go to my website. Don't do the /donate. And you can go to my issues, you can go to all of the Flint information, you can see the packet and all of the responses from the 11 legislators that actually responded back to me. Out of the 110 people in the House and 38 people in the Senate, only 11 legislators responded to my information on Flint, which is also shameful. And so you can see all of that information on my website. And if you're interested in running for office, contact my campaign. I would love to help you get involved with the Green Party. One of the great things about the Green Party of Michigan, we have ballot access. We do not have primary access, which means we have a convention, which is going to be this spring. Most likely it's going to be in Flint. We nominate people for all of these local offices, and then you will be on the general election ballot. Which means you don't have to worry about the dirty primaries that the Democrats and the Republicans run, that you will be able to run on the issues specifically for the people, and work and run and speak to issues. And we, as the Green Party, when people talk about running as third party, and a lot of people like to say that it's impossible the way that our system is actually made to work, is actually incorrect. The Green Party, if we become a super minority in our state house and our state senate, especially with a green governor, we will actually be the controlling faction as the super minority. And that is something that we can actually do, and we can actually really make some huge changes in our state legislature and in our policies by putting in green legislators who will work on these issues and work on them for the people without any big donors. And as much as people say that there are progressive Democrats, the Democratic Party itself is beholden to its big donors. So no matter how progressive somebody is in the Democratic Party, no matter how progressive somebody is in the Republican Party, or that you think someone is anti-establishment on the Republican side of things, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are still beholden to their big donors. And so no matter what, they still have to do what their party says. And their party says, do what our donors say. And that is why when you have members of these other two parties in office, that they don't actually make the policies that they speak about when they're running because they can't, because their party doesn't let them. And so the Green Party does not have any big donors. I am not accepting any super PAC money. I'm not accepting any PAC money. So if you are someone who is from a union, I would love to speak to your union and talk to them about the issues and how I support unions, but I will not accept money from any PACs, and that includes union PACs, and that is how you know that I will work for the people. So thank you all so much for watching and taking the time. Again, there's a couple other people that joined up. Is there any other questions that those of you who are still watching have before I sign off? Okay, no? Well, thank you so much for taking the time. Please help share this video and stay tuned for other live chats where we can have more interaction together. And I hope you have a great evening and a great good night. I don't know how to finish.